Good morning, everyone. Well, today I'll give an overview of the latter stages of my completed research program at the Ripley Slide within the Thompson River Valley of south central British Columbia. So the primary goal of my research was to study the variable soil water content and unsaturated soil strength at the Ripley Slide and investigate how they contributed to an unseasonal displacement event in February 2017. So nearly 2 decades of borehole records and instrumentation monitoring was compiled into a 3D model of the landslide to provide insight into the changing three-dimensional stress states that led to increased displacement. The study concluded with a modeling exercise to isolate the impact of variable suction on stability. So the geologic history of the Thompson River Valley consists of sediments from at least 3 separate glaciations from the mid-Pleistocene to the beginning of the Holocene. Successive glaciations eroded the underlying andesite bedrock and previously deposited glacial stratigraphy. Valley glaciers coalesced to form ice sheets and subsequently retreated, creating a series of thin, ribbon-like glacial lakes in the Thompson Basin. As the glaciers stagnated, the ice dam in the Proto-Thompson River Valley was breached and meltwater began to flow westwards towards the Pacific. Over time, the modern Thompson River was formed with steep valley walls between Kamloops Lake and Lytton. While many of the glacial sediments south of Ashcroft are characteristic of high energy deposition, namely coarse-grained soils, an interbedded layer of glacial lacustrine silt and clay couplets still endures around the modern-day river level. A particularly weak plane in this glacial lacustrine layer is indicated by the red arrows here in the right-hand figure, notably below the seasonal minimum river level. This weak plane is responsible for many of the landslides in the Thompson River Valley, including the Ripley Slide. So the Ripley Slide is one of the several translational landslides in the Thompson River Valley south of Ashcroft. And the Thompson River is home to an annual salmon spawning run. So as a result, there's restrictions on dam construction found in the BC Fish Protection Act. A major factor in its stability is the seasonal changes in river level, which can vary by 8 meters throughout the year. The base of the Thompson River is directly exposed in the base of the Ripley Slide, is directly exposed in the Thompson River, and historical explanations for the displacement have targeted the buttressing and drawdown effects caused by changing river elevation, artesian pressures underneath the landslide toe, erosion exposing geologic controls, and irrigation on the upper terraces. This research was focused on the seasonal impact of the natural water input through precipitation, and a significant component of this landslide's mass is unsaturated, so therefore stability from this part of the landslide should not be neglected. A detailed network of instruments have been installed over the past decade, including piezometers, shape arrays, a weather station, and a permanent layout of electrical resistivity tomography. The recent program also installed Matric suction sensors at several locations along the headscarp. So the following plot demonstrates some of the environmental indicators that contribute to changing displacement rates at the Ripley Slide. Displacement is typically very slow and impacted by the seasonal variability of the Thompson River level. Historically, the increased rate of displacement usually occurs in the fall after the seasonal peak in river level. The dropping river level leads to a reversal of groundwater gradients, development of artesian pore pressures below the low hydraulic conductivity clay layer, and a loss of buttressing at the toe of the landslide. However, this pattern was not observed during the most recent reactivation of the landslide. Displacement was minimal in the fall and didn't accelerate until February. At this time, the river level was near its seasonal minimum, but was actually increasing when the movement started to accelerate. The increasing river level can be attributed to a higher than average rainfall or snow melt that occurred just prior to movement. In this part of British Columbia, there are very mild winters, as indicated by the temperature record. And above zero temperatures can sporadically occur throughout the winter, releasing accumulated water trapped as snow. These factors seem to have contributed to an unseasonal increase in displacement recorded in February 2017. So the primary sensor used in this study was the TEROS 21 matrix suction sensor. And these sensors essentially are high frequency capacitance sensors, and the effects of soil salinity are minimal as long as the electrical conductivity remained low, which it was at Ripley here. So the manufacturer claims plus minus 10% accuracy for these soil suction measurements between 9 and 100 kPa. It may extend to 2000 kPa for some soils. They operate based on the premise of soil or water potential equilibrium between the porous ceramic disc and the soil medium. The relative permittivity of the ceramic material is measured by the capacitance sensor and correlated to the ceramic's water content. The SWCC for the ceramic disc is well defined, allowing calculation of the porous stone's matrix suction. Provided that the sensor is placed in good contact with the soil in the borehole, we can assume that equilibrium exists between the two, giving the soil suction. So over a 5-year span, matrix suction measurements were collected at 2 boreholes only 15 feet apart. However, one is installed in the headscarp and the other is in the slide mass. So you can see the relative differences in seasonal variations of matrix suction here. So while the slide mass changes seasonally, the headscarp showed lower and more consistent levels of suction. And the lower level of suction, or closer to saturation, also implies a higher hydraulic conductivity. So as a result, a higher rate of infiltration can be expected throughout the year in the tension cracks. So the permanent layout of electrical resistivity tomography was installed as a part of a collaborative effort with both the BGS and the GSC. Visual plots such as these were reproduced on a weekly basis from the BGS between 2017 and 2019. Increasing water content or negative changes in resistivity are depicted in blue on the following plots. The wildlife cameras also show surface conditions and accumulated snow present at the time of each ERT measurement, while air temperature for the survey period is plotted across the bottom. The following plots show spring ground thaw and snow melt in early 2018, leading to preferential flow and deep infiltration within the headscarp. In the bottom ERT plot, infiltration is shown as a dark blue crescent that extends down to 7 meters below ground surface in the tension cracks. The tension cracks also act as a collection basin for blowing snow in the winter and overland runoff in the spring. So when temperatures rise above melting, accumulated snow releases water directly into these tension cracks. Therefore, a major component of the groundwater appears to be derived from tension crack infiltration. So during the field program, in situ testing was conducted for the saturated hydraulic conductivity of the superficial till material using a Guelph permeameter. Although the results are only valid for discrete points, the 6 tests gave surprisingly consistent hydraulic conductivity estimates within 2 orders of magnitude. Samples collected during the hand auger drilling and water samples from local precipitation, runoff, and the river itself were analyzed to determine the stable water isotope composition. These water isotopes verified that the groundwater originated as cold weather precipitation and runoff. In addition to these tests, several ASTM standardized tests were conducted for the recovered grav bag samples, including gravimetric water content, total suction with chilled mirror hygrometer, specific gravity, grain size distribution, liquid limit, plastic limit, and Tempe cell experiments. The data collected from this field program and laboratory testing filled in a material parameter gap that was missing for the upper till unit. Previous borehole investigations focused on the lower portion of the landslide due to this inaccessible nature of the upper slope. So the near surface till unit spans the upper portion of the Ripley slide and is unsaturated in the headscarp region to a depth of at least 3 meters. Samples collected from this till were brought back to the lab for further testing of the unsaturated parameters. Sealed samples were tested at their in situ water content to determine the total suction for the dry portion of the SWCC. Tempe cells were used to test the suction for the wet portion of the SWCC below 250 kPa. So combining these measurements from both these methods was shown to be a viable option for estimating the SWCC over a wide section range as demonstrated by Fredlund et al. 2018. The following plots used gravimetric water content rather than volumetric water content because the volume change in the low plasticity silty tail is minimal for this low plasticity silty tail. So the next aspect of the study was to quantify the impact of matrix suction variations on the overall stability. So I began this with a 2D analysis of 3 cross sections using seep W and slope W. And a fully specified slip surface was applied and displaced translationally along a known residual slip plane around 257 meters above sea level. All these scenarios also included the river level at its seasonal minimum and a land climate boundary condition along the ground surface. Geotechnical parameters came from previous studies, and focus was placed on the unsaturated strength contribution from the superficial till found in the upper reaches. All other units were assumed to have no unsaturated strength component because they were composed of coarse grains material, were non-existent in these cross sections, or were present well below the ground surface, and conditions were expected to remain saturated there. So I tested 2 scenarios of transient seepage for all cross sections using these previously back-analyzed geotechnical parameters. The first involved the rapid melt of a hypothetical 0.3 meter snowpack using an observed rise in temperature from January 3rd to January 15th, 2020. And the second analyzed a 1-inch precipitation event that occurred over a 15-day period from January 31st to February 14th, 2020. All this meteorological data used in the analysis was collected at the on-site weather station. And stability analysis was also then conducted at quarter-day increments for each period to document the change in factor of safety. So both scenarios indicated potential changes of up to 10% in the overall factor of safety. On the other hand, the seasonal variation in the river accounted for about a 20% change in factor of safety. So therefore, the near surface soil water content variations can have potentially large impacts on slope stability, especially if they coincide with the seasonal minimum river level. So following the 2D analysis, a 3D model was developed from the wealth of historical data collected for the Ripley slide. A LiDAR scan of the study site was carried out in 2019, which provided a detailed 3D point cloud of the site and ground surface. Geophysical surveys included ERT, EM, GPR, seismic wave refraction, and MASW. Information gathered from these surveys were used in combination with borehole logs to interpret the 3D subsurface stratigraphy. So back analysis of the 3-dimensional groundwater table at the time of increased displacement in February 2017 was performed in a static LEM model using SV slope. Local variations in the groundwater table were applied in order to simulate a factor of safety of 1 with a landslide volume that mirrored the observed tension cracks and shear plane. Changes to the groundwater table were fixed at the active piezometer locations, and decades of slow translational failure at the Ripley slide has reduced the clay's strength on the failure plane to its residual strength. Therefore, the shear plane was modeled with a fully developed residual strength. However, the critical slide volume was not fixed and identified a hybrid ellipsoid with the lowest factor of safety that closely resembled the extent and translational nature of the Ripley slide. So 2 transient pore pressure scenarios were modeled. The first case involved the seasonal increase in river level from minimum to maximum, while the second case maintained a static river level near the seasonal minimum. The purpose of running both scenarios was to isolate the impact of suction from river level, and this allowed me to quantify the contribution of suction to slope stabilization, or equivalently the initial slope destabilization. Transient pore pressure changes were modeled at weekly intervals from February until June, when the river level reached its seasonal peak. This modeled time frame accounted for a 6.4 meter increase in Thompson River level. As a result, the division between the river head and land climate boundary condition had to be altered weekly to reflect the variable boundary conditions that are critical to groundwater flow at this site. Initial estimates of saturated hydraulic conductivity were found to provide close agreement between the modeled and observed pore pressures, and it was observed that pore pressures rose prior to movement and remained high in February 2017. Subsequent stages predict that suction in the upper till steadily increased due to evaporation, and the water table dropped with brief relapses caused by intermittent rainfall. The simulated pore pressures from each scenario were used to model the change in factor of safety between February and June 2017. So the results were compared to observed displacement and river elevation over the same period. The minimum factor of safety between the Morgenstern Price and GLE methods were used to calculate the critical factor of safety for each scenario. So on February 10th, 12 millimeters of rain fell, which combined with the fact that local snow cover was in the process of melting. This contributed to a loss of matrix suction, and the river level was near its seasonal minimum. Consequently, the displacement increased to a constant rate of around 2 millimeters per day on February 15th. Between February 15th and March 29th, there is a 4% increase in the factor of safety for both scenario 1 and 2, indicating progressively drying soil conditions. The factor of safety plots from each scenario began to diverge after March 29th, when the displacement rate quickly tapered off due to the rising river level. Stabilization due to increasing river level is further supported by the nonlinear increase in factor of safety calculated for scenario 1. By subtracting scenario 2 from scenario 1, I was able to isolate the individual effect of river level on factor of safety. At peak river level, the river buttressing effect independently accounted for at least an 11% increase. Therefore, it would appear that a loss of suction due to aptly timed infiltration caused at least 4% drop in the factor of safety, which led to faster displacement beginning on February 15th. This was followed by slow stabilization from suction increase and rapid stabilization from river rise after March 29th. I'd like to thank my PhD supervisors, Dave Elwood and Michael Hendry, and my committee for their guidance on this research program. And I'd also like to acknowledge the valuable collaboration from David Huntley at the Geological Survey of Canada and Jessica Holmes from the British Geological Survey. Finally, I'd like to thank the remaining sponsors here today for your contribution to this research, and I hope we can continue to build on this partnership. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions.
I don't actually have a question, but I have to say that was very impressive, really comprehensive and really superb. Great job.
Thank you.
Not really a technical question, but why is it called the Ripley Landslide?
It's actually named after Charles Ripley, who noticed the original movement in 1951.
One of the founders of Lone Krippenberg.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I met him the extended day. Yes, big guy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I see the trigger. The destabilizing process of saturation of the unsaturated soils during the spring melt or whatever.
Yeah.
So that kind of points me towards possible mitigation for them, such as horizontal drains or something like that from the river level.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if that would be. Are you finished your research now?
Yeah, I've finished defended in December. So,
okay. But that
that's definitely
that is extremely helpful for understanding of how these slides are activated, what the processes are, and how we can possibly target the causes.
Yeah, I think especially like some of the stuff we've seen at like Goddard Slide too, where we had a lot of water ponding up to slope, and I think it shows how it's kind of been maybe not missed, but it's something that we don't necessarily consider in our modeling. That's, I think, quite critical to some of these mechanisms. So,
good job.
Yeah.
You mentioned melting snowpack contributing to that saturation. Have you looked at all at correlating years where there's more movement or reactivation with years of higher snowpack or any of those sorts of climate relationships?
Didn't really look at it specifically, but you can kind of tell a little bit with the river level when it was peaking at higher rates, because obviously that's all related to your snowpack melts. So
Mhm.
I think you can see it a little bit. The interesting thing was that when it actually started moving in 2017, it wasn't as low as it's been in some other years. So that was one interesting thing I noted. from
Really
it.
low this year.
Yeah.
David, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did actually. I was going to say, I mean, it's, you mentioned Goddard, but I think, you know, like this is a really great sort of working model too for North Slide
Yeah.
as well. And, you know, like maybe the lower parts of Deeper as well, which seem to be showing some, oh, and South Slide perhaps. So I mean, it's pretty much all of the
Yeah, it's a dry area. So yeah.
It's a dry area that has a fair bit of groundwater movement.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I
8
think
meters
that's the
change.
problem.
So
The ERT data shows that wetting front moving down the
yeah.
scarp, the bracket.
Yeah.
Do you have any way of quantifying, you know, what the benefit of sealing those cracks would be? Would that reduce the problem or just spread the infiltration out? Is the water going to go somewhere else, or
Yeah.
can we do anything with that mode of stabilization?
And then the other problem is then if you fill them in, is how long it's going to be till they just open up again.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's like you spend all that money closing them up, but I don't know how long it'll actually last.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
hopefully sealing them up would slow them.
yeah.
4 months before they opened up after they did the first, the little bit of investigative work a couple of years ago. The slope was reactivating.
They reappeared within 4 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the river's triggering a lot of some of that movement as well. So then even if you close it up, you're maybe stopping part of the problem, but you're not stopping all the problems. So
And then my other question is, I mean, you focused on the main body of the Ripley slide, which is significant.
yeah.
We're struggling a little bit with the downstream end and whether that's the same mechanism or some different mechanism related to the scour hole
Yeah.
in the river.
I think looking at that one was a little more bedrock controlled over there, isn't it? So
Potentially, yeah.
yeah.
Interesting work.
Yep.
All right, thank you very much.